So, welcome back to the Thursday night lecture. We're currently doing the Vimalakirti Sutra, so this is the second in that series. So last time we got through the very beginning of the text, and if you are interested, the PDF is available online, so we can look at it. So we're going to roughly do somewhat of a traditional model of kind of going line by line, but I'll try not to belabor any particular points and certain things. There's summaries in different parts of the text, so as appropriate we'll go through and take larger chunks or smaller chunks where there's a lot of detail. So, but the beginning here lays out a lot of what it means to be a bodhisattva, what a bodhisattva does, and also what we can learn from that. So the very beginning of the text is praising the attributes of the bodhisattva. So I have on the whiteboard to the side some of the specific points we're going to take tonight in a little bit of detail. So I'll go through those. As is the case with a lot of text and translation, the English glosses over some things. So we're going to make reference back to the original Chinese from which it was translated. So of course one of the traditional canonical languages being classical Chinese. So we'll make some references, and I have some of those written there on the board, how it was translated and then what the original was. So we'll get into that a little bit. So the next line in the text, so if you're looking at the original, either hard copy or the PDF, we're still on the first page of the first chapter entitled Buddha Lands. So it says there, subjugated the vengeful Maras and controlled those of the heterodox paths. So I'm going to tackle this sentence backwards first. What are heterodox paths? And then who are these Mara guys? Why are they so vengeful? So we'll kind of go at it that way. So I want to start off by saying when it says heterodox paths, it's not specifically talking about other religions. So before anybody looks at this and thinks that somehow the career of the bodhisattva is to oppose other religions or to look at them as heterodox or somehow as below the Buddhist teaching, that's not what this refers to. So you could think of this portion as being more associated with what we might today call propaganda or fake news. So it's more of misunderstandings or misapprehensions of reality. So a heterodox path would be, we could all agree on certain basic fundamental truths about the universe, and a philosophical system which is contradictory to that. So something that's leading you completely astray. So that's more what is meant by heterodox. So there are certain basic ideas that Buddhism holds. For example, things being impermanent. So if we had a philosophical system that says something, all things in the universe are permanent, there's no change whatsoever. You can observe, in the course of a day, things changing and see that may not be the case. So it has more to do with those types of ideas. So there were times in history where people gathered together and debated, these great ideas. A lot of that, we don't do that so much anymore. We don't have, the university quad where people are engaged in great debate, so to speak. But if that were the case, and we were looking at just kind of the clash of, battle of ideas for idea's sake, or for, just, you have that friend that likes to debate just to debate, that type of debating, and people say, well, why not this, why not that, what if this, what if that? This is the kind of heterodox viewpoint. So it's not specifically focused on other religions or other specific people's ideas, more of these kind of out there, what if scenarios. So that's the first one. And that, if you get into religion or philosophy, sometimes you can get bogged down into that kind of, thinking. The classic one, I guess, in the Christian theological perspective is how many angels can fit on a pinhead. Where you get bogged down into the minutia of religious thought that has, how does it actually benefit you? Even if you could figure out the number, what does that do for you? So that kind of thing. So it's easy sometimes when we get either over-intellectualize certain ideas, or think that we can quantify everything. So the reason why in Buddhism there are practices is that certain things you can't quantify, right? You can't put a number on it. You know, how many hugs from somebody you care about does it take to overcome a hardship, right? There's no way to quantify these things. It has more to do with the experience. It has more to do with, you know, your feeling of whether or not the person is genuine, situation, circumstance, background. So these are not quantifiable, measurable, you know, outcomes. So a lot of spiritual practice is the same way. You know, how many bows do I have to do? How many mantras do I have to recite? The answer is going to be different for every person throughout every time in history. So this is more of the heterodox idea. So we think about it as propaganda. If you remember back, it was more popular when I was younger. I haven't seen it too much these days. But you always have that cartoon where you have, you know, the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other one. So if we think of you know, heterodox views and Mara as being you know, these kind of ideas that you get, you know, well, no one's watching, so what difference does it make? Or, well, you only live once, so, you know, well, it doesn't hurt anybody else, so then it's okay to do it. So we get certain concepts or ideas in our minds, and we think, well, it doesn't matter, or I might as well give it a try. And there's always that kind of voice whispering to you, why not? What's the worst that could happen? And of course the worst happens and you're like, oh, why did I do that? And then it's too late. So the bodhisattva, having subjugated the vengeful maras, is looking at, you know, those little devils on your shoulders that are encouraging you to, you know, find any temptation or distraction to keep you from doing anything good, or especially to keep you from doing your practice, right? So we say, oh, I want to do meditation, but I don't have the right meditation cushion. I have to find the right meditation cushion before I can sit down and meditate. And so that becomes a new distraction. You spend hours on the internet, you know, hunting down the latest and greatest meditation cushion. Or, you know, why should I waste my time doing this? I could be doing all these other things that are more fun, more interesting. Somebody calls and, okay, I'll be right over, you know, this can wait, I'll do that later, and then we never get around to doing it. So these are the probably more typical maras that we face, right? These little pesky demons in our life that distract us from doing anything good. Sometimes it's, you know, distracts us from doing just basic day-to-day tasks. Sometimes it distracts us from doing really important or making important decisions. So in general, it tends to say, you know, do what's comfortable, do what's easy. You know, why are you working so hard? You'll never get anywhere. And this is the same sort of outlook, feeling, idea that the Buddha faced, right? So his the last watch in this meditation before he attained enlightenment, Mara, as a personification of all of these desires, you know, raises his ugly head literally, and shows every type of temptation, everything to distract the Buddha from, you know, pursuing enlightenment. So whatever it is that we're interested in, if it's food, drink, sensual pleasure, you know, a big one could just be, you know, sleeping. Why meditate? You could sleep. It's the same thing if you're really stressed out. Right? All these ideas come up, and we have to confront those. So these are the types of, you know, maras, these kind of that's the little devil on the shoulder that we're trying to subjugate, to get over. But these are focused, if you notice when you're talking about these maras, is an inward focus, inward battle. So it's not, you know, as opposed to some other system of thought or some other philosophical system. That's not a component, or that's not part of the equation as we go through this portion. So I guess it would be logical to ask, okay, if you're subjugating these ideas, how do you do that, right? So how do I actually go about doing that? So that's always my question. If my teacher used to talk about his early training, and his teacher would say, well, do this, this, and this, or, you know, meditate this long, and he'd say, show me. You do it first. So I always thought that was a funny story, but also, you know, somewhat reasonable. Like, well, show me. How was that done? And so the Buddhist teaching is very good about laying out, you know, these are the attributes, these are the practice methods, and this is the fruit, or this is the result of doing that type of practice. So what follows logically now is, what do you do? How do you comport yourself? What type of practice do you do? So we get the, here's the bodhisattva who's overcome these obstacles, and then we get a list of the what should you do, right? How should you actually act? So this is what is being tackled, right? The misapprehension of reality, and then what types of practices do you do to actually see things for what they really are? So that's our task as we move forward. So the next line is, they were entirely purified and had forever transcended the impediments, or you could translate that as afflictions. And these impediments or afflictions tend to be tendencies of mind, right? Maintaining the correct Dharma, spreading the Dharma widely. These are things that have already been discussed, like when we talked about last week. What are the actual activities of the bodhisattva? What types of things should you be engaged in? It talks about that their activities of body, speech, and mind are pure. So we went through some of those things last week. So these impediments and afflictions have been removed, and as a result of that, these are the attributes of the bodhisattva that the Buddha is praising at the outset of this chapter. So you see this result is this kind of compassionate countenance, this face of someone who is in meditative ease. If you look at the face of the bodhisattvas, they're not upset, right? The Kanon's face there is very serene and compassionate. And so how do you get that? How can we walk around and look that way all the time? So the Buddhas don't have deep wrinkles and furrowed brow, from decades of why is my life this way, right? So having overcome that, how does it manifest? So if we're interested in that, then what follows is those practices and those instructions. What can we learn from that? Why are these things being praised? If we look at how the bodhisattva comports themselves, we can contrast that with our daily life, right? What's our life like? So, yeah, not like that, right? So we spend more time, our stomach does flips because out of nervousness or trepidation, or we have our heart rates go up because we're stressed out, or we have some kind of fear or some kind of stress that we have going on in our lives. So this is one of the big differences. So if we say, okay, I'm not that way, then that's a measure, right? It's a mirror. So in this way, sometimes the Buddhist texts are referred to almost like a mirror. How do we gauge ourselves? So if we just say meditative ease, then we say, oh, okay, well then, last night I had some meditation. I think I was in meditative ease, and that seemed like a pretty good meditation session, so I'm there. But if we get more detail on the bodhisattva, then we could say, maybe not. Right after that meditative ease, I screamed and yelled on the phone about something. And some telemarketer called me, and I got very upset. You know what time it is, and how do you like it if I call your house? And so I would suspect that the bodhisattva would not react this way to the telemarketer, right? But then did we? So we have that touchstone, that mirror to hold up. So here it says they were entirely purified and had forever transcended the impediments. So that to me suggests that maybe there's more than one impediment. Maybe there's more than one defilement. Maybe there's a whole truckload of them. So what are they? What do they look like? What kind of practices should we be engaged in? So that's what comes next. So when I read this sentence in English, I thought, had entirely purified and forever transcended the impediments. Well, which ones? So I went back to the original Chinese, and lo and behold, there's a lot more detail in the original text. So this is what comes next. So there was, and we have that on the board here. So the forever transcended the impediments. So the text refers to 5 obstructions and 10 bonds. So this is the original. So that was somewhat simplified in the English text. So it says you're forever separate from, or you depart from the 5 obstructions and 10 bonds. So what are the 5 obstructions? Desire, anger, drowsiness, excitability, and doubt. So these are 5 obstructions, right? So oftentimes what you'll see in Buddhism are a lot of lists. So it'll give you,
We're stuck.
yeah. Sometimes people refer to this like as a religion of lists. So actually, it's a memory device. How do you recall these things? So if you just give a long list of things, then sometimes it's difficult. But if you categorize them, sometimes it's easier to recall them. So okay, there's 5 of these things. What are the 5? I've got 4. Okay, the 5th, and so you can remember it. So there's a lot of this going on because we did start off as a oral tradition initially before these texts were written down. But secondarily, if we go back in time, so let's go back to the time these texts were translated. You couldn't go to the bookstore and buy a copy. If you wanted one, you had to hand copy it. So most people didn't have as extensive a library as we do today of Buddhist texts. They weren't as easily gotten. So it was not uncommon, especially in the Chinese literary loving culture that it was, tendency for people to memorize snippets of text, have it, be able to recall it. But if you think about this teaching being something that you want to benefit your life, then you want to be able to recall it when you need it. Not the, wait, stressful situation in life. Let me see. Chapter 3 had something to say about this. Let me consult that. And then I can get back to you, right? So you actually want to be, have that information readily available. So the more it's laid out in chunks that you can remember, then the more easily you can wield that information when you need it. So this is one of the reasons we have these lists. So if you've any course of study, right, has this. Even if it's safety precautions. So before I start welding, I need gloves, I need a mask, I need to do this or that. If you're going to work on a computer, some people wear a grounding strap on their wrist. Let's not zap the electronics. So you go through a certain step, and as you go through those steps, you internalize it, and then it becomes second nature. So if you want the teaching to become second nature, organizing the information in a more logical format is helpful. So that's why we have these lists. So for tonight, again, Buddhism appreciation. So the homework is not to go home and memorize all these. I'm not discouraging you from doing so, but no requirement. But partially just if we see how it was translated in English and then understanding that below in the original Chinese is a lot more detail, I think we have a deeper appreciation for the language. And if it does encourage you to learn one of the canonical languages, then that would be great. So those are the 5 obstructions: desire, anger, drowsiness, excitability, and doubt. So if you think about what obstructs you, most likely, if you're in this country, you weren't born into a Buddhist family, raised devout Buddhist from the time you were young. Some people were, but vast majority were not. So they have come to Buddhism out of an interest from some direction. So at some point, you've probably faced doubt. What is this about? Even if it's just a young person, why am I here? Why do I have all the stress in my life? What's the point of all of this? So doubt can be this very big obstacle. It can be an obstruction to you wanting to go further and doing anything. It leads a lot of people to just say, forget it, there's no point in me doing this. This is a waste of time. So you can see very clearly how doubt can be a huge wall and get in between yourself. Sometimes as a result of just not having a good resource, not someone patient enough to answer questions or work with you through something. Sometimes just as a result of deep crisis. But sometimes it leads us in directions that we don't intend, or it leads us to really dark places. We lose faith in anything, right? So I met some people and it's the result of a bad relationship, and then they lose faith in anybody. They trust no one, right? I don't trust anyone anymore. And so it really decreases our ability to have any kind of meaningful relationship in any context. So this is one of the ways that doubt can be very destructive. Anger, right? Probably that one's pretty obvious. But drowsiness, so it's not just if you have teenagers, your teenagers that are constantly tired and complaining, but you can probably bring to mind someone who almost like chronically drowsy, and it gets in the way of everything. If you've worked in an office environment, there's probably one person that's just sort of always nodding off, or it really seems to be an impediment to doing things. So that can be, one of a huge obstacle to any kind of spiritual practice. So, why was tea so highly coveted in Buddhist culture? It's for the drowsiness, right? So this is one of the major impediment. So if you think studying the sutras today with nice, clean, beautiful print and computers and cross-references and, good light, and you still get tired, think about the old days with hand-printed texts, sometimes on questionable paper quality, by candlelight or oil lamps and things like that. It would be very easy to nod off. So drowsiness would be, one of those obstructions. So those are things where we give consideration to it. And again, it's like a mirror, do any of these fit me? And then if so, you just become aware of it. So again, it's not to start blaming yourself or create another layer of problems. Why do I have number 3? Why, number 4 is more easy for me to deal with, so it's not that. That's another obstacle. So what are the 10 bonds? So these are the 10 kinds of afflictions. So things that bind us to this world, to, repeating the same types of behavior and problems that we get into. So the first one is lack of conscience. So not having a conscience, no inner guide of what's right or wrong. I think due to media, those instances are more widely seen, right? I think especially now, I've noticed with surveillance cameras, you get more and more people thinking no one's watching, I'm just going to do this. There was a famous case in China. One of the officials, the son had a nice sports car and hit a woman. She was riding her bike or crossing the street, and he hit her, and she survived. But he was afraid, it would look bad for him, or they'd get, extorted with money or something like that. So he ended up, stuffing her in the trunk and killing her, trying to, just get rid of this crime completely. So this is where you see where, there's no conscience. There's no maybe I should get this person medical attention, right? Instead, the first thought is, this could get worse for me. Let me try to cover it up, right? So, but right, why do we know these things, right? So we have more media attention, and so it happens a lot. But that's one of the big ones, not having a conscience at all. So we get pulled into a very deep cycle of recurring behavior that's not helpful for us. The second one is lack of shame. My experience, this is one where it seems that in modern times, especially with, I'm going to blame social media again, almost though that people celebrate lack of shame. I have no shame, why should I have shame? Almost that we look down on shame. Now, there's definitely a degree to where you can overly, not that we should shame people, but having that feeling is a good way of your mind or your inner compass telling you, maybe this isn't so good. Maybe I should go back and make amends for that. Maybe I need to apologize for this or that thing. But there's almost, I think, a sense, especially as we are able to celebrate it, right? Everybody's Facebook page is like their own media company. So, yeah, I did that, so what? And then they can just kind of go about justifying and getting people to say, yeah, that's, and you get someone to reinforce that. You've never met that person. People say things over the internet that they would never say in person. And so I think that lack of shame part is you start to see more bad behavior celebrated. So the third one is envy. It's going to sound like the 7 deadly sins, but yeah, let's call it the bond of keeping up with the Joneses, right? I think this is another one that is magnified by social media, maybe. Where before, I remember when I was younger, people would get Christmas gifts, and then they'd come back to school after Christmas break, and they'd all brag about what they got. But certain things you couldn't bring to school. So you're like, that kid didn't really get that thing. I got the Millennium Falcon and all the Star Wars action figures. Like, no, you didn't, prove it, Yeah, I can't. If I could bring it to school, I'd prove it. Yeah, he didn't get that. So there was a limit to envy. Now, here I am at the store buying it. Here I bought it. I'm playing with it. I'm enjoying it. I broke it, but I'm so rich I can buy another one. And so this cycle almost gets worse. And so sometimes I think where in the past we couldn't experience all of these levels, sometimes it makes it worse. It's more immediate. It's happening faster and more constantly. Perhaps that's my perspective because I didn't grow up with social media. Maybe people who that's always been a part of their life will have a totally different perspective. But I think it changes the immediacy of those emotions, right? So those are things we have to be aware of. So moral of the story, social media breaks are good. So keep it to cute kittens and baby pictures. The fourth one is parsimony, the unwillingness to spend money. So Ebenezer Scrooge type behavior. So being frugal, good. Being unwilling to spend money on anything ever, even when it's needed, becomes an obstacle. And it can be even sort of a degree of friction for other people, right? Especially that person that always shows up and is only there when the food is free or you made it or you're offering, and then it's a stressor for other people. But it's also a kind of a grasping in and of itself, so it can be difficult. Number 5 is regret. This one I've noticed is pretty big in terms of the effect it has on people. So it tends to be one of those things that people hold on to for years and years, decades. Things they wish they had done and hadn't done it. Actions they wish they had taken, they didn't. Opportunities they feel like slipped them by, and it really holds them back from doing anything else. So having those feelings of regret can be very detrimental, can really hold people back from not just our kind of basic material goals, but even in my experience, spiritual goals. People say, well, I had this opportunity, but I didn't do it, and then they never try again. If you look at the, any great saint, any great figure in Buddhist history, rarely did it go smoothly the first time. So, great example, Master Sunzang, wanting to go to India. He had a lot of obstacles on the way. He had a lot of times when he was told no. And I'm sure he thought, I thought that was a good plan. That didn't work out, so he tried again. But if he had just sat around and let regret kind of hold him back, the vast majority of the texts that we have, we wouldn't have, most likely. So due to his lack of regret, right, and just perseverance, literally the arc of Buddhist history is different. So sometimes for myself, those stories help because we all have obstacles, and if we think, how am I going to go forward, and then you look at the historical stories, you're like, well, there's really nothing compared to this, so keep going. So it can be very helpful. So 6 is drowsiness, torpor. Again, it shows up again. So drowsiness is actually a huge. When I was in college, I was never, as a young person, I was never very particular about where I slept or what I slept on or this kind of thing. But when I got to college, I encountered this phenomena where people had like a favorite pillow and they would carry it around with them, even to class. And would go to class in pajamas, which I understood if you woke up late and whatnot. But it seemed like there was like a culture of sleeping, a bed culture. And I thought it was very interesting. And when I first got there, it's Michigan, so if you have it, especially girls, if you wear the fleece footed pajamas, it's warm, and it's very cold outside, so I understood. But it was just like all the time, pillow, and I thought, well, that's very interesting. It's like, oh, this is a new world for me. So perpetuating and maintaining even that state of drowsiness or sleepiness seems to be something that we sometimes encourage or we're reinforcing. So that's something we have to be kind of on guard about. So what's the best way to combat it? Something you can learn very quickly in temple life is having a regular schedule. So getting up at the same time, trying to go to bed at the same time, regularity of meals. This is built in to monastic life. You learn, you're like, I'm not really hungry yet, but it's time to eat, so okay, And then pretty soon there's regularity, and then you'll notice that it's easier to sleep, right? So you're not so drowsy in the middle of the day. And even if you are, there's someone there to say, this isn't the time. So eventually, you overcome it, yeah. No, there was no hitting, but yeah. So that's one of the ways. So just becoming aware of that and having that kind of regularity. 7 is flightiness. Probably better to say irresponsibility or inconsistency. So I've heard people describe other people as being flighty, but the person who doesn't follow through, right? That lack of follow through can be actually very disruptive to others. So that's a big one, right? That's actually gets in the way. Slackness, lethargy, having a gloomy personality, right? That's another obstacle. So how do we actually combat that? So as we go through the text, we'll have those, additional strategies for kind of combating that. Number 9 is wrath. Fury is probably a better one. So we get a lot of people you probably know who very quickly you can set them off. Yeah, and they just very, very furious. So that's a huge obstacle to a lot of things. It's an obstacle to interpersonal relationships with people. It can be an obstacle for advancement, for basic things like career advancement. People aren't too interested in that. There's definitely times when we expect people in certain positions to have a level of professionalism, and being just the smallest thing setting them off. Generally, people go, that's maybe not so good. Maybe they aren't suitable for this or that, or so it can be a huge impediment. But it can definitely be a huge impediment both for our life generally, but trying to attain meditative calm as well. And I've seen people trying to get comfortable meditating and just like storm out. It sets them off. Too much silence, right? It sets people off. And number 10 is hypocrisy. But especially with pointing out other people's behavior and saying, you see what they're doing, when you're actually doing the same thing. So especially along those lines. Why is that person that way? And you're actually doing the same thing. You've got the huge plate of food. Why are they eating so much? And you're just gorging yourself. That's horrible. Pointing it out, usually in the middle of doing the same thing. So those are 10 bonds. So going back to the Chinese gives us a little bit more detail, other than the English translation of the text, which is just transcended the impediments. Right. So what are the impediments? So these are the types of things that the bodhisattva has transcended. So can we maybe cover we're being serenaded more often these days. So I believe they're just behind the screen. Sorry, thank you. It might help, especially the one that faces out. Instantly better, yes.
Oh, it does make it.
Yeah. So the next sentence in the English text is maintain their minds always in peace and unhindered emancipation. So this is another one where once I went back to the original Chinese, it was a lot clearer. So it actually gives 7 kinds, 7 types of Dharma gates, 7 practices, things that should be practiced. So what are those 7? So I have that there at the bottom, the Qizong Famen, the 7 Dharma gates. So Dharma gates is a kind of a standard description of methods in Buddhism. So Dharma methods, Dharma gates, ways that you can actually begin your practice. How do you enter the practice? So they're sometimes referred to as Dharma gates. So these are the 7. So the first one is unobstructed liberation or unobstructed understanding. So this gives specific types of understanding that the bodhisattva has, and it's broken up into 4. So not making mistakes in teaching. So I'm still human. I still make mistakes in teaching from time to time. But the bodhisattva at that stage no longer makes mistakes in teaching. So having no obstruction with regard to the Dharma, like being able to perfectly discuss, explain, preach the Dharma. Right? You have this unhindered ability. The second one is unobstruction with regard to content and meaning of the Dharma teachings. So not only being able to teach it, but actually having very deep insight into the meaning of the things the Buddha says. So we see this oftentimes in the sutras. The Buddha will say something, or someone will pose a question, and one of the bodhisattvas responds and gives a very detailed analysis of that teaching. So this is one of those times where sometimes the Vimalakirti Sutra is one of those where the Buddha sort of taps someone else to be the speaker. So when we get further into the text, you'll see that who's actually the teacher, who's expounding, who's doing the explanation is one of the bodhisattvas. So this is one of the skills. Unhindered speech, so understanding all languages. So this is a good skill, right? So to be not just bilingual, trilingual, but all languages, right? Having that. So this is interesting as an idea, right? So this represents, so speech, language is symbolic of ideas. So everybody throughout history has the same idea, right? They have a bell. Every culture has a bell, pretty much, right? But every language has a different word for the bell. So this would suggest that we have the ability to understand concepts, but every human culture has a different way of expressing it verbally. So there's a tremendous amount of variety in how we express it as an actual language. So that's actually kind of an interesting idea. But the background, the original imagery, idea is universal, right, throughout the world. So it's kind of interesting. And the fourth is unhindered ease and explanation. So being able to use the above 3 skills, not making mistakes in teaching, having no obstruction with regard to the content or meaning of the Dharma teaching, understanding all language. So combining all those 3 and being able to put it to the use of saving sentient beings. So not just that it's an individual intellectual pursuit, but actually something that you put to use, right? You use it for the benefit of people. So that's the first of the 7. Unobstructed or unhindered understanding and how it manifests. The second of the 7 is mindfulness.
That was the first 4.
No, that is the 4 prongs of the first one. Yeah. If you're interested, I can send you the list, but so the second one is mindfulness, especially correct mindfulness. So that begs the question, what is correct versus incorrect mindfulness? So this, right, if you go back to the suttas and some of the Buddha's earliest instructions about meditation, one of those is about mindfulness of the breath. And there's many objects of mindfulness, or proper objects of mindfulness, correct mindfulness. So mindfulness of breathing is given as an example. So you are mindful of breathing in, mindful of breathing out. So this is why we do breath meditation. And that's common to most every Buddhist tradition will teach this method of meditation. So in the suttas, it actually discusses the benefits of breath meditation. So it says those, breathing and developing mindfulness of the body actually gives insight into certain aspects of our life. So the first of those is mindfulness of the body as a frame of reference. So you actually use your body as a frame of reference. So you'll also see this a lot in Buddhist teaching. You'll see something about the body or something about the immediate natural world being the analogy or illusion that the Buddha uses to illustrate something. So why would he do this, right? Why would you say, Buddha lands as numerous as pores on the body, or as numerous as sands in the Ganges, or something like that? It's something that you, with your body, can go and apprehend very easily. You don't need scientific apparatus. You don't need even a tremendous amount of education. You can understand the concept because you have a body. You can look at your body and say, on the tip of a hair, there are innumerable Buddha lands, and say, well, how small is that tip of a hair? So as a human eye, we can't quite focus in on the tip of the hair, but you can see it's very tiny. So probably the skin pore or the human hair is one of the smallest, things that we can see with the naked eye. So this is one of those reasons. You can contemplate that idea. That idea is not too far beyond your immediate experience. So it's a very good frame of reference.
Question real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Is that also where, if you go to most Vipassanas, they're doing, I think, Satipatthana, which is like the body scan, things like that?
Yes.
This is an example of that.
It would be, yeah. So this is mindfulness of the body. So doing that kind of body scan meditation, if you're alive, you have a body, right? So you're not, and again, it transcends culture, it transcends time. It's not objectionable. So for some monks, they would actually contemplate death. They'd actually go observe a corpse. That's not a good practice for everyone, right? That's a practice for a certain time to overcome, it's a medicine, right? To overcome a certain problem. But scanning the body and gaining awareness of the body, everyone has a body. You're largely mindless of your body, right? Your heart beats, you breathe throughout the day, and you don't give any consideration to it. But when you bring that awareness back to the body, the result of that, again, this is one of those unquantifiable experiences. You obtain a certain level of calm. You obtain a certain level of concentration, ability to concentrate, that a lot of people are like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. And it's immediate. You have it. You're walking around with it. You're born with that tool. So it's a very good skill to develop. The other thing you have to think too, right? Go back 2,600 years. The Buddha's teaching in India. You're under a tree. What do you have? Right? You might not have very much. And what happens when you want to practice, but your temple's been destroyed by war? You still have, right, these very basic abilities and skills. What happens if you're caught up in a military junta that doesn't like you and they put you in prison? You still have a body, and you can still meditate and still focus on your breathing. So it's always available, right? It's always there. It's free. The basic things that the Buddha's teaching you, the Dharma is open, it's available. So it doesn't require, it helps to have other things, right? These are all aids, it's very helpful, but it can be done without them. But much easier if you do have them, though. So the other one is mindfulness of feelings. So pleasure, pain, emotional states, things like this. As you slow your mind down, you become more aware, or you see your emotional states in a different way. So this is one of the benefits. Sometimes we think that whatever we're going through emotionally is too much for us to handle. I can't do this, right? This is too much for me. I'm overwhelmed. And then someone says, okay, take a deep breath, think about it, calm down, and you gain a different frame of reference. So this is a very basic example. But if we do it through meditation, we can actually obtain deeper insight, right? And we can overcome those, both physical pain and emotional pain as well. then mindfulness of the body as a frame of reference, meaning are our actions wholesome or not wholesome, right? What are we engaged in doing? What is the result of that action? A lot of times people don't give thought to that, right? We're battling wildfires here, right? Even just before we came in, the wind changed, so we have smoke outside the door, probably getting a little scratchy. So allegedly the person who started it probably didn't give thought to what they were doing, the destruction they were going to cause. So if you have a greater awareness of the actions of the body, then maybe before you follow through with that action, you say, oh, wait, I actually see where this is going, let me not engage in this, right? It's not an action without a result. There would be a result, potentially the result's bad. Is this action wholesome? Then you stop that action before it becomes a problem. So these are things. So this particular action, right, results in habitat destruction, potential loss of drinking water supply is massive. I don't think the person thought of that when they did their action of starting the fire. Probably didn't think they were going to. But if that's the way we start a lot of activities, we don't know, this doesn't matter, what's the worst that could happen? So if we have that ability to stop and gain awareness, then we don't follow through. We say, this action is not wholesome, so we don't do it. Right? So we have that perspective. The fourth one is mindfulness of mental qualities as a frame of reference. So we get to see how our mind is playing out, if it's wholesome, unwholesome, its effect on us, not just externally, but internally. So it's, I guess my example would be like your inner weather report. Where are things going? What's the outlook? I'm frustrated with the chance of an angry outburst. How do I really feel about the situation? And you see this sometimes. People walk in and think, I can stay calm, and then they snap because they can't. They don't really have a good gauge of themselves. Or I can handle the situation, and then they can't, and it overwhelms them. So if we gain a better insight into our actual capability, then we either avoid situations that are too much for us, or we learn, actually I have greater capacity, I can take on more. But sometimes we think we can't. So this is part of the results of mindfulness practice. Right? So this is sometimes the difficulty that we run into as mindfulness as marketed and sold as a package product. Sometimes we lose some of these deeper ideas that are the purpose. Like, why do we practice this? It's not just to de-stress. So sometimes it's sold to us like a spa experience. Less stress, more productivity, you'll be healthier. That's true, but we also want to look deeply into our minds and deeply into our motivations for things. So
yeah, from a medical perspective, especially when mindfulness is reference to the body, one of the hardest things for me to do is get people to be really present with their own pain, their physical pain, to be really present with it, and feel it, know where it's coming from, and to examine it.
Yeah.
Because if they can't do it, it's very hard for me to help them.
that's very true. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people, they either have their consciousness of pain is completely out of whack, right? So you do the pain scale, go to the doctor, so on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your pain? And some people come in, they're like, it's a 2 or 3, and their arms falling off. And other people, they're like, I'm so off the scale, and what happened? I have a splinter. So we're oftentimes we are very out of touch with our own emotional states. We're very out of touch with physical states. So this is, we do want this kind of balance, right? This is very helpful. A lot of the things that we would put in the category of suffering, or if you ask the average person, what's your biggest problem right now? A lot of times it's not really that big of a problem, but we've made it out to be. Or there's so much denial. Oh, that's not a problem. No, that's really a problem. So this helps us fine-tune, right, these indicators. So this is some of the great benefits of mindfulness. So, so I'll move on, because some of these recur throughout this initial part of the text, so we'll go through. So that was number 2. Number 3 of the 7. Concentration devoid of perceptible attribute. So what does that mean? Yes, I know. So samadhi, meaning deep concentration. So it's a meditative state where characteristics are not observed. So this is achieving a state of meditation that is this. We talked at the very, very beginning about the 10 levels or stages of the bodhisattva path. So at a seventh level bodhisattva has this type of insight. So what does this mean? So sometimes it's described as one of the almost like a level of heaven, in terms of having it such a deep state of meditation that you're beyond certain sensations, you're beyond mental impressions, or I guess you would say observing characteristics of things. So everything you observe things as very equal. You're not making such hard distinctions, right? Let's say you're looking down on people and you just see people, right? You don't see, oh, that person's wearing this, or that one's tall, or this one's rich, or that one's poor. It's just, you see, not making such distinctions, just very, very equal viewpoint. Kukai actually, we go back to the Juju Shinron, the 10 stages of mind, as a text, he discusses this concept, and he says that it's a type of concentration devoid of 2 attributes, and those 2 are ignorance and debilitation. So this is the best English translation I could find of Suzong. So ignorance is our typical Buddhist concept of, not having a really deep insight into what is motivating our actions, why we do the things we do, right? One of the kind of the initial philosophical problem that we face, not knowing where we came from, not knowing where we're going, and most anything, right? Where are we going when we leave here? Where will we always go the same way? Will we speed up when the light turns yellow or slow down? All these kind of things. Like maybe we don't know. What radio station will you tune to? Maybe you don't know right now. But something will move your hand to do it, and we don't have keen insight into all of those features of mind. So that's quick idea behind ignorance. Debilitation are kind of incapacitating afflictions. So we have afflictions, things kind of at our subconscious level, to use a more Western psychological concept. So there may be things that are inhibiting our mind, our decision making, and they become debilitating, right? They really hold us back. So these are things that the 7th level bodhisattva has overcome. Wow, the smoke is really strong. The wind must have shifted. So these are sometimes referred to as like latent afflictions, things that are very deeply seated in our consciousness. I have a friend, her daughter's just started kindergarten, and she gets very concerned because she sees certain behaviors in the child, and goes, I wonder where this is coming from. I wonder why this manifests, or this isn't anything that we've exposed her to, and that kind of thing. So maybe there's these kind of latent impressions, right? Certain very strong impressions that carry over, and maybe too early to say maybe how it's going to play out. So strict Buddhist philosophical perspective, we have this alaya consciousness, right? This storehouse consciousness, and in that we have stored all of our past life memories, but also sometimes out of that comes very strong impressions. sometimes those come forward and they manifest as skills, right? I'm sure Mozart had some very strong impressions coming from his consciousness that he could compose sonatas and symphonies as a kindergartner. With other people, I think, there are certain tendencies or interests, and parents go, where did they get that from? Why are they interested in that? Nobody here is interested in that. That's very unique or different. So at this stage, those impressions are not coming up because they're so deep, right? Maybe they're, right, during the Mongol rule, you were someone, and so you have this very strong impression. So, or maybe you saw something as a child and it made a strong impression, but you don't really have a conscious memory of it, but that impression is still there. So overcoming those kind of very deep-seated impressions. So those are the types of obstacles that are overcome with this type of deep level of meditation. So these things are possible. So I would say if we, again, think of this as a mirror, right? Do we say, are we done meditating? Are we done with our practice? And if the bodhisattva shows this is possible, then we say, okay, I still have work to do. So I could say, I still have these deep impressions, these deep, maybe reverberating energies from past experiences. So I still have work to do. So that tells us, okay, that more work. Without this level of instruction, then maybe we do some meditation and we say, well, that's good enough, right? I must be a really good level here, For a second there, I forgot about all my problems for a second. So that's a very deep meditation. So we go, then we read the text, like, oh no, we still have a long way. So this could be very, very beneficial in that way. So we'll go to four of the 7. This one I found very interesting, and I'm kind of glad I went back to the original Chinese text, because when I first started studying Buddhism, I got this recommendation from my very first teacher. It was a Tibetan Lama, and at the time I didn't quite understand why this was given. But the 4th in this is the practice of dharani, mantra recitation. And sometimes that practice is called total retention or total comprehension or recall. I hate to say total recall because I'm reminded of the movie, but this kind of mental building exercise. So recitation of mantras of dharani have traditionally been attributed to building a strong memory. So how do you, again, going back to a time when we didn't have all the texts at our fingertips, where you couldn't carry around, in your laptop, every Buddhist text ever written, or even on a DVD, right? I think you can get the DVD now with all the texts, where mental ability was more important, memorization skills. So how did you build that memory? How did you, reinforce that memory? It was actually through the recitation of dharani and mantras. So this is one of those practices. So when I first started practicing Buddhism, this was suggested, not only because I was learning something new, but I was learning it in a foreign language, right? So how do you recall this teaching? So mantra recitation was recommended. So that was one of the first practices given. So this is the 4 of the 7 is that type of practice. The other reason that practice is provided is when you're reciting mantra, right, you're focused. And during that time, other thoughts don't get in. So how do you protect yourself, shield your mind from those kind of thoughts? You can use mantra practice, dharani recitation. So this is something you can do actively to keep out. Probably as a kid, we were like, la 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 la, I don't want to hear that. So this is a more Buddhist refined version, right, where you're getting something out of the practice and at the same time learning something. So putting the teaching into practice in a way that is beneficial both for our memory and then as a means of protecting the mind. So this is the 4th one. So we'll do one more. We'll do the fifth one, and then we'll wrap up for this evening, because our it's even like hazy in here now, so it really, the wind changed. The fifth one is eloquence. So the perfecting speech, and the way the teaching is taught. This becomes important because you've all had the experience. Some teaching may be very good, but the way it's delivered, not so good, so you don't want to listen. I'm reminded of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and the teacher there, you know, wah, 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 you know. So you may have a very engaging subject, but if the delivery is not engaging, you don't get a lot out of it. So one of the benefits of listening to the bodhisattva versus listening to me or some other teacher is this, you know, perfect eloquence. So you're hearing it in such a way that you're really drawn in. You're really, you know, pulled in by the speaker, and it engages you more. So it's incredibly engaging. So that capability becomes something that's very important. So this is one of the other skills the bodhisattva has, is this very deep eloquence, impressive effect on the hearer. So the listeners are you know, deeply, there's a deep impression made on them. So it goes in, you can actually study the different types of eloquence that the bodhisattvas perfect. That's probably more relevant if you're going to be preaching the Dharma, right? So if you're in the position to actually teach the Dharma, then how should you be presenting the teaching? What attributes should you cultivate? So that information, right, is in the sutra. So we have that kind of appreciation for that. So we'll stop there for this evening. So we'll pick up with the 6 and 7 when we come back next time. Yeah, because of travel, it'll be a few weeks. So, but we do have a group in Hawaii that our group owes some teachings to, so we'll be there. So to our friends in Honolulu, we'll see you soon. So we'll stop there.